Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our Boston Children's Hospital and McKaylee Center webinar. Today we're going to be talking about athlete nutrition and psychological aspects during this COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to log in and join us. We got a couple familiar faces and a couple new names, which is really cool. Hi, Danielle. Hi, Stacy. All right. And we'll just wait a few more minutes or seconds. For those of you that have joined, you will be able to ask questions in our Q&A and chat. So if at any point you do have questions, we'll answer them at the end, but you can send them in at any time. That's totally fine. And it could be in the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. Either way is totally fine. Okay, so I know we have some more people that are supposed to come in, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I am gonna get us started with our introduction. So first, we have Robin Amylon. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And she's going to be, she's one of our sports dietitians, and she works full-time over at BU as a strength and conditioning specialist and as a sports dietitian. And she's been kind of filling in her role in our sports medicine department as a couple of our nutritionists were out for a little while. And so thank you, Robin, for joining us and agreeing to do this webinar, which is really cool. And so Robin's going to give us our start tonight with talking about athlete nutrition and things like that. And then once Robin is all set, we'll do a quick break, a very quick break, just to get in some more questions and things like that. And then we'll introduce Dr. Kim O'Brien, who will then speak. And then at the end, we will, address everybody's questions. With that being said, Robin, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Let me just get my screen shared. Okay, awesome. Can everyone see this okay? I'm going to assume yes. Okay. Thank you. So as Sarah said, I am going to start by talking about athlete nutrition during this COVID-19 time. It has been quite a difficult time for most of us. Sports were canceled, practices were canceled, basically everything was canceled. And there is some confusion in terms of how we should be fueling during this time when our activity may look different from how it used to look. So I'm hoping to kind of answer that during this presentation. So just to see what's on the menu and what we'll be covering during this webinar, first we'll do a quick overview on nutrition. We'll talk about building a performance plate and what that should look like and how we should be setting that up. We'll talk about nutrient timing, so what we should be eating before our practices or our workouts. Same thing with after and the time in which that should occur. Definitely touching on hydration because that's just as important as the fuel that we take in. And then briefly talking about energy availability. So what happens if we don't fuel our bodies properly for performance, how that's going to affect our performance, how that's going to affect our overall health, and then where to find the facts, because there is a lot of misinformation out there. There are a lot of influencers out there on Instagram and other social media platforms that may not be credible, and it's important to know where to look for the right information. So first, talking about nutrition and the athlete, it's really important to understand how nutrition can affect your performance. It's so important to make sure that you are properly fueling, because if you're not fueling properly, then as you can see from the picture, food is fuel. It's like getting in your car and trying to go somewhere where you have no gas in your tank. You're not really going to get far or anywhere at all. So it's really important to make sure that you're fueling and eating the right things before you go into your activity, so that you feel good for that activity, you have enough energy for that activity, and you can perform to the best of your ability. And then it's just as important to make sure that you're fueling well afterwards, so that you can recover from that activity and then be able to be ready for the next practice or the next training session that you're going to have. So it's so important to make sure that you're getting the right fuel so that you feel good for your practices and for your workouts. So briefly talking about what exactly a healthy diet is, and there's so much information out there. As I already said, there's a lot of misinformation out there, in terms of what diets we should be following and what is healthy, what is not healthy, and all of those things. So when you're getting that type of information, I want you to look at these key points and ask yourself these questions if the particular plan that you're looking at includes all of these things. So one, a healthy diet is a diet that is adequate. It is a diet that gives us the amount of energy that our body needs in order to function, but also in order to do our sport and to perform well. It is adequate in the nutrients that we are receiving. So we're getting enough carbohydrates, we're getting enough protein, we're getting enough dietary fats, we're getting enough vitamins and minerals and fiber and all of those things. We're getting enough fluids. So we need to make sure that we are getting enough of those things in order to perform to the best of our ability. It's also balanced, right? We're not cutting out any particular food groups. We are including a variety of foods from those food groups without excluding anything. We are having, sweets and other things that we enjoy. We're not restricting in terms of any specific food. So we have a balance of all of those foods collectively together. And consistency. We shouldn't be skipping any meals. We want to make sure that we're eating in a timely manner, that we're eating consistently throughout the day, because again, food is fuel, and you need that constant fuel throughout the day in order to help you to get through, whether you're in school and then you're going to practice and then you're doing a workout or whatever it is that you're doing from your day to day. It's really important to make sure that you are fueling consistently so that you can keep your energy up. So let's talk about what exactly we should be putting on our plate and how we build a performance plate. And there are some key nutrients that we always need to make sure that we have on our plate when we're putting it together. One of them is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are our body's main source of energy. This is what gives us our fuel. This is our gasoline in our body. This is what's going to give us energy to get through our workouts, to get through our practices, to get through our training sessions. And it's really important to make sure that we're including carbohydrates in all of our meals. They're also protein sparing. And what I mean by that is if you're not getting enough carbohydrates in your diet, in your meal plan, your body's not just going to give up, right? It's not just going to stop working. Your body's really resilient, and it's going to compensate to make sure that you're getting the energy that it needs in order to keep functioning and keep you alive and all of those things. So what it will do is it will start using fat for one as an energy source, because that is also an energy source, and we'll see that in a few slides. But it will also start using your protein, and it's not going to take just random protein. It's mostly going to take protein from your muscles. And we know that that's not good as athletes, because we need to be strong so that we can be fast and explosive and powerful, and we need muscles in order to do that. So if we're not getting enough carbohydrates in our diet, then we could potentially start start breaking down our muscles, which is obviously going to decrease performance because we're not going to be as strong and as fast. You can see from the graph on the right here, looking at the relationship between carbohydrates and, taking in carbohydrates and depletion, where you're losing your carbohydrates. So muscle glycogen is your storage form of carbohydrates. It's the term that we use for storing carbohydrates in our muscles. And you can see at the beginning, before activity, your glycogen stores are full, they're high, but after you do activity, you can see how they decrease. And you can see the relationship between if you're including carbohydrates in your diet to replenish that versus you're not. And you can see that when you're consuming carbohydrates, you're able to replace the carbohydrates that you had used so that you're ready to go for the next session. But if you don't, if you're not including carbohydrates in your meals, then you can see you're kind of digging yourself in a deeper and deeper hole in that chart that's shown on the red, on the red line. You can see that when you're not consuming those carbs, you're basically digging yourself into a deeper hole and you're not getting the energy that your body is going to need for the next session. So it's so important to make sure that you are continuously including those carbohydrates in your diet so that you can replace the ones that you use up when you're doing activity. Our next thing that we need to make sure that we're including is protein. So we know that protein is really important for building muscle, for repairing your tissues. After activity or during activity, you're basically breaking down your muscles and tearing them down. So it's important to make sure that you're having some protein in your diet so that you can rebuild those muscles and make them stronger and help you with recovery. It is also, as we just mentioned, it can provide fuel, but that's not what we want to use protein for. We want to spare protein in order to repair our muscles and build our muscles. So, but that is an option if we're not getting an adequate diet. And it also prolongs fullness. So protein helps us to feel full for a longer period of time. So it helps us to feel satisfied after our meals. And you can see some examples of sources on the slide. And then next, we really want to make sure that we are including dietary fats. Fat is not a bad word. It is really important to include. If you're not getting enough fat in your diet, you're actually compromising your own health, which is then going to compromise your performance. If you're not the healthiest that you could be, then that's obviously you're not going to be able to be the best athlete that you could be. So it's really important to make sure that you're including fat in your diet. Fat is super important for making hormones. So testosterone and estrogen are fat-made hormones. And if we're not getting enough fat in our diets, then we're not going to be able to produce adequate amounts of those hormones, and then we're going to have other health issues because of that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And as well as protein, fat also helps to prolong fullness, so it helps us to feel full and satisfied. And again, you can see some examples on the slide of sources. So how do we translate this into English? Like, we know that we need to include these nutrients in each of our meals, but how should we plate that out, or what should those portions be? And so you can see this athlete's plate here that, as athletes, again, we are using a lot of energy, not just for our regular daily activities, but for our practices, for our training sessions. Hopefully eventually we'll be competing if we're not competing already. I know some settings are. So it's really important to make sure that we are keeping our energy up, and we already said that we're going to do that through carbohydrates. So we want to make the majority of our plate carbohydrates. So you can see on this picture that half of your plate should consist of carbohydrates. And then the other half is going to be divided between your protein sources, because we definitely need to make sure we're getting protein in each meal, as well as, fruits and vegetables we know are important because they contain a lot of vitamins and minerals, and those nutrients are important for recovery because they do help to reduce inflammation. And then you can see in terms of fats, we should be including at least 2 tablespoons, and that can be in olive oil, that can be salad dressing, that can be butter, that can be avocados, whatever your source is, but just making sure it's included. In terms of nutrient timing, so before training, we want to make sure we give ourselves enough time to digest the food that we're consuming. We're not going to feel good if we have a big meal, 5 minutes before we're about to do 100s or whatever the workout is for that day. So we want to make sure we give ourselves at least 1 to 3 hours in order to digest our food and feel good. Obviously the less time you have, so if it's only an hour, you might have a smaller snack versus if you have the full 3 hours, then you would have a full meal for that. We want to make sure we're having carbohydrates, as I said, so it's primarily going to consist of carbohydrates, and then we're also going to make sure we include some protein in there. We want it to be lower in fat, the pre-training meal or snack, because fat does take a longer time to digest than the other nutrients. And again, we don't want to have a meal sitting in our stomachs right before we're going to do our training. So we want to make sure it's predominantly carbohydrate and protein, and you can see some examples of snacks and meals on the slide here. In terms of our post-training, it's very similar to our pre-training. We need carbohydrates in order to replace the energy that we had used up during our training session. So we need to include those nutrients. We need to include protein because, as I said before, during your training sessions, you're breaking down your muscles. So we need that protein in order to recover and to repair them. So we want to make sure we're including that. We can now, make sure we have a good fat source, because unless you have another session immediately after, we don't have to worry about that digestive piece. So it can be, a well-balanced meal, or if it's not quite mealtime, you could have a smaller snack. Or it could be something as simple as having chocolate milk. Some individuals aren't hungry immediately after they finish training. So if they can tolerate at least a glass of chocolate milk, that'll get the recovery process going. And then a couple of hours later, have a full meal to finish that recovery. In terms of snacking, because we should be eating consistently throughout the day, every 3 to 4 hours. So, we're not going to be able to meet our needs through just meals. So we want to make sure that we're getting some snacks in there too. And when I talk about snacks to my athletes, I talk about having my snacks in pairs. So not just having a carbohydrate source. So not having, for example, just some crackers or some pretzels or a granola bar, but I'm pairing that with a protein source or even a dietary fat source. So you can see some examples on the slide, but for example, maybe I'll have some pretzels with hummus, or I'll have some crackers with peanut butter, or I'll have trail mix that has nuts and raisins or other dried fruits in it. So I'm getting 2 nutrients together instead of just one. In terms of hydration, because hydration is important, we want to make sure that we are also hydrating before our sessions as well as during and after. So before, you can think of the rule of thumb of 2 and 2. So about 2 hours before your training session, you want to have about 2 cups of fluid. So if you have a Gatorade bottle like this on the slide, or you have another bottle that is 32 ounces or 1 liter, that would be half of the bottle. That would be 2 cups. Then up before the session that you're having, maybe about 10 to 15 minutes, you can finish the bottle or have at least another quarter of that bottle in order to make sure that you're going into your session well hydrated. During your session, it's recommended that every 15 to 20 minutes, you drink about 1 to 2 cups of fluid. So 1 cup would be a quarter of your bottle. So really trying to hydrate as often as you can. I understand that most coaches don't give a water break every 15 to 20 minutes. So just trying to hydrate throughout your practices or your training sessions as often as you can is super important. And because you know that you probably won't get adequate breaks that you need, it makes it even more important to go into that session well hydrated before even starting your practice. And then in terms of how you really know if you're staying well hydrated, I'm sure many of you have seen this urine chart before. So, trying to stay above the red line. I tell my athletes think lemonade, not apple juice, when they're thinking about their urine color. So, if you are below that line, making sure that you are adding a little bit more water throughout the day to try to get above the line in terms of your urine color. But you can also see on the left other signs of dehydration to kind of look out for and be aware of. If you start feeling these symptoms, make sure that you are getting adequate hydration to see if that is the issue. And lastly, we want to talk about balance. So we do need to find that balance. We know that the energy that we take in from our food minus the energy that we expend during our training, and not even just during our training, but in general living and in our daily activities, that's going to tell us what our energy availability is. And ideally, we are taking in the amount that that is used during training and that is needed for life and regular bodily functions, so that we are not in a deficit, because that can have an effect on performance. So looking at what those signs and symptoms are of low energy availability, you're definitely going to feel tired if you don't have adequate energy, and that obviously is going to affect your performance. You're not going to have as much endurance. You're not going to feel as strong. You're not going to be as fast. So it's really important to make sure that you are staying adequately fueled. You will get injured more easily. You will get sick more easily, and this can recur more often. It'll take you longer to recover between sessions. You might feel more sore in between sessions, or just fatigued. It can increase risk of stress fractures. You may feel irritable, may have trouble concentrating, and you might have nutrient deficiencies. You might be low in certain vitamins or minerals, which is definitely going to cause some issues in terms of health and performance. And then lastly, you might have some menstrual dysfunction. So you may be missing your period or not getting it consistently, or have other hormonal irregularities. So things like, in males having low testosterone, which is going to affect performance. And for females, just touching briefly on the menstrual dysfunction, estrogen is what helps to regulate our menstrual cycles. And as I said before, fat is really important in terms of making that estrogen. If we're not getting enough fat in our diet, then we're not going to be able to produce adequate amounts of estrogen. But estrogen doesn't only control our menstrual cycles. It also is really important for bone health. Estrogen is important for keeping calcium within the bone. So if we're not having adequate levels of estrogen, then we could also start weakening our bones. And then that's going to have us have females be at increased risk for stress fractures and other injuries. So, again, it's really important for all athletes to make sure that they are fueling adequately so that they don't have these symptoms and they can perform to the best of their ability. So lastly, where to find the facts. It's really important to get your information from a registered dietitian, preferably one that is a sports dietitian. So the credentials for that you can see on the slide. RD is registered dietitian. Sorry, I put CSCS. I meant CSSD. CSCS is a strength and conditioning certification. Sorry about that. But CSSD is a certified specialist in sports dietetics. So they are a sports specific dietitian. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is also a great resource, as well as the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietetics Association. They also have a lot of great information as well. And then finally, just some key points. Although activity may be different during this time, maybe you're not having formal practices or you're not having formal training sessions. I know a lot of you are doing things on your own. You may be running outside, you may be doing workouts at home. So I know we're not all just sitting like slugs on our couches. We're being active. So we need to still make sure that we are fueling properly. We want to make sure that we're fueling consistently every 3 to 4 hours. We're including carbohydrates, protein, and fat in each of our meals, as well as fruits and vegetables. We're having those paired snacks that I had talked about, and we're also hydrating. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. All right. So super awesome information there. I think it's like super important right now, especially because when it comes to fad diets, I guess. We sometimes panic, and then we're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to gain any weight, even though my sport is canceled. And managing that turns into kind of a panicked situation. And so I think that's all great information for our athletes. And so I know we'll have questions come in for you, Robin, so hang tight. And next up, we have Dr. Kim O'Brien. She's one of our clinical social workers, and she's also a professor at Harvard Medical School, an assistant professor of psychiatry, and a research scientist in the Department of Psychiatry at Children's. So we're super lucky to have her on our team here. She has also been a huge part of our staff wellness throughout this COVID time. So super excited to have you here, Dr. O'Brien, and whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thanks so much. So first of all, Robin, that was awesome. That was I can't believe how much you covered in a short amount of time. That was an awesome presentation, and it really sets me right up to talk about something that I think isn't often talked about with athletes, and that's disordered eating. And what we've seen a lot here in the sports medicine division, especially the female athlete program here at Children's, is during COVID, this has really spiked. And so it's becoming ever more important for all of our athletes to be aware of this, our coaches, our parents, so that we know how to spot it, what to do, how to help. So just going in a little bit off of what Robin was just talking about how because our athletes have such a high demand for energy, they can be energy deficient if they're not adequately fueling. So that's exactly what Robin was talking about. And like she noted, some of what can happen if you don't have that energy availability is that you can have fatigue. Oftentimes there's extreme weight loss. It does affect your sport performance frequently. And there can be often a lot of injuries and stress fractures. One thing specifically to note for female athletes is this female athlete triad. So female athletes are known of developing this, and what this is a threefold condition of disordered eating, the loss of period, and osteoporosis. And although each of these things on its own is a medical concern, together they create some serious health risks that might be life-threatening. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the prevalence and the progression of disordered eating in athletes. I'm not sure how, it's hard to get accurate numbers, but it's estimated that up to 20% of athletes have a diagnosed eating disorder, and that's higher than the general population. This number is higher in female athletes, and it's also higher in sports that emphasize leanness, sports like gymnastics, figure skating, running, things like that. And what's important to know is that for athletes, this disordered eating typically starts with healthy dieting that then progresses to more restrictive weight control or increases in exercise. So it doesn't always start like right away. This can gradually creep right up on you. What happens too is once these unhealthy eating behaviors start, and so by unhealthy eating behaviors, we mean things like restrictive eating or purging can happen as well. And such behaviors like this, what can happen is they're often reinforced, not on purpose, but unintentionally by other athletes and coaches, maybe by noticing, oh, you look really fit, you look great. What have you been doing? And so these kinds of positive reinforcements that are, meant to be well-intentioned, if they don't know, if these athletes and coaches don't know the meaning behind it, like what measures the athlete's been going to lose the weight, or if athletes themselves are seeing this improved performance on their own in the short term, I'm going to note, because in the long term, this kind of thing will hinder your performance. But sometimes if they do notice improved performance and think it's related to changes in eating, this can escalate to an eating disorder. COVID has just, the quarantine from COVID has really, I've been practicing, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. I've never seen eating disorders like this before. And it's due to this quarantine. And the reason why, there are a lot of reasons why. One is the isolation that comes along with being in quarantine. What I've been seeing just anecdotally here is a lot, especially because I mostly work with teens and young adults, but mostly teens. And what I've been seeing with these teens is, especially March and through the summer, when there was real strict quarantine, they were at home on, social media, maybe TikTok or something like that, or they were so bored that they're like, what can I do? I'm going to get fit. I'm going to go work out. I'm going to, get in shape and do what I can do because I can't go to my practices or do these other things. So it all started out well-intentioned, and then it just snowballed for these kids. Part of that is also due to this lack of structure. So these kids felt like, okay, I need to create, either subconsciously or consciously, I need to create some structure on my own so that I can kind of get through this and maintain some control with respect to my training and my life, frankly. Loneliness too has, contributes to things like depressed mood and anxiety, which when individuals feel depressed or feel anxious, they often cope with it using restrictive eating or using, they may binge eat and then purge in response. There's a lot of different things that can relate to it. Other psychosocial stressors have come up during quarantine. All of the political unrest and everything that's been happening in our country absolutely, can contribute to disordered eating as well. This inability to exercise or train has, again, fueled some anxiety in these teens, and that has led them to feel like they have to, because they can't exercise and train the way they were before, they feel like they need to then control their eating so that they won't gain weight or they will stay fit. And I can't stress enough the impact of social media on these kids and what is posted on TikTok and Instagram and everything else that these kids really watch and look at. There was something like that was on about, what I eat in a day. And some kids would post like, an almond in a, I don't know, something else. And that's what they ate in the day. So there was like this race to beat that. So these things are happening and we don't know it as parents or coaches, or we don't always see it, but this is what these kids are experiencing. There are major consequences of disordered eating in athletes. One is just impaired muscle and skeletal health. I mean, that in itself, it's harmful. Disordered eating affects teen and young adult athletes through injuries they may get. A lot of them are stress fractures or stress reaction injuries. And also, if these kids are already injured, it will cause increased recovery time from the injury if they are also having disordered eating. Because again, their body needs adequate nutrition to fuel themselves so that they can function and recover. The heat, fatigue, dehydration, those are consequences. A lot of times fainting and lightheadedness can happen because of this. And what you'll ultimately see when with disordered eating in athletes is reduced sport performance, which for a lot of these athletes, that's what ultimately might be the motivator for them to change their eating behaviors, which is why I put that one at the end as perhaps the most important to them. Here are some warning signs. So if you're a coach or you're an athlete and you might be concerned about a teammate or a parent, and you're just want to make sure you're on top of it with your own kids, here are some things that you might want to pay attention to. You want to notice if you notice the athlete is eating too little, they seem to not be fueling adequately for the amount they're training, or if they tend to be exercising or training too hard, like they seem to be going at it more than normal without a clear goal. They also, if you notice that they seem to have an increased focus on their weight, shape, or appearance, that's certainly a red flag as well. Being underweight, or if you notice a significant weight loss in a short period of time, or that they start to drop off their growth curve, that's another major warning sign. Abnormal sex hormone cycles. So for males, that's, and Robin talked about this a little bit too, For males, that's low testosterone, females, missed periods, and for all genders, it's low energy, fatigue, mood changes, poor sleep, and hair loss. Stress fractures and overuse injuries, that's often at children's how we start to notice that there is an eating disorder going on, because they come in with an injury. So it's really kind of how their foot gets in the door with us. And then, of course, decreased sport performance is another thing that should that can cue you in to be like, what's going on with this kid? They seem to be a little bit off. They may just have not enough energy, and it could be because there's some disordered eating going on. So how can you help these athletes who are having some disordered eating? The first thing to do, if you're a parent or a coach, you want to listen to their concerns without any judgment or lecture. And I know this may seem to go without saying, but in a lot of sports, this still happens, is to really avoid making any sort of weight-related comments to any of your players. I know I work with a lot of figure skaters, and this is a routine thing. Coaches will talk about that you're too heavy, you're too heavy to be on the ice. You need to lose weight. I mean, if you're concerned about your athletes developing disordered eating, you will not make those statements. You want to make sure you're educating athletes on the dangers of low body weight and how important it is to adequately fuel yourself for performance. Like what the presentation Robin gave was so good. It was so full of information and really helpful things for how you can fuel yourself to be the best athlete that you can be. So that's the kind of food related information we want to be communicating to our athletes. And like Robin talked about, creating a schedule for regular meals and snacks. And if you do notice that there is some disordered eating going on and you feel like it needs professional help, you want to make sure that athlete is connected with a support system that supports their total health, meaning you want to connect with a doctor, dietitian, and a therapist. Ideally, having all three on board is the most important thing you can do. And that these providers communicate with each other too, to help this athlete. And for a lot of athletes, if they do seem to be dropping off their growth curve or really dropping weight quickly, they may need some routine weight checks. This I just wanted to put on at the end here of how to contact the NEDA Helpline, the National Eating Disorders Association Helpline. This is the website. So if you go to nationaleatingdisorders.org, right when you go on, it says like contact the helpline. And there's a way you can text somebody, you could call somebody, you could chat. And this can be for if you're worried about yourself, if you're worried about somebody else, anybody can contact this. This is the place to go for this. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my portion, just, for what I feel is an extremely critical area of mental health and overall physical health and wellness of eating disorders, which is just really not talked about enough among our athletes. So now I know that we're going to open it up to questions for the both of us. So I will stop my share.
All right. Yeah, that's great information, and nothing rings more true, because especially working in athletics, all three of us, in the sports medicine type of, department, we see the injury first, and then we have to kind of like peel those layers back and get to the root of the problem there. So especially those stress injuries that can tell us a lot for sure. And so couple questions here. So this one's for Robin. I was curious what your thoughts were on competition nutrition in between periods, halftime, et cetera. Also wondering your thoughts on nutrition in extended games, like ones that go into multiple overtimes with intermissions between periods.
Yeah, so basically nutrition kind of during activity, which I didn't cover in my presentation. But yeah, nutrition during activity is super important, especially if you're going to have extended sessions. So essentially after 60 minutes of activity, you have used up pretty much all of your carbohydrate stores, so all of your energy stores. So if you're going to continue to exercise longer than that, it's really important to make sure that you are fueling during that activity. So if it's prolonged games, like during half times, during breaks, you know, a track, for example, they have weekend long meets and they have, you know, multiple races and things throughout the day. So it's really important to make sure that they're staying fueled during that time. And for that, you will mostly focus on carbohydrate sources, you know, because you need that quick energy and you need, you know, carbohydrates are the fastest nutrient to digest. So it will digest quicker and it will give you that energy that you need. So for example, you know, examples of that could be just like pieces of fruit. It could be crackers. It could be pretzels. It could be, you know, if you like sports products, it could be like gels or chews or things like that. Gatorade is also a great example because you're going to be able to use that for two things. You know, you'll be getting carbohydrates from that Gatorade, but you'll also be able to rehydrate, which you need to do during prolonged activity too. So sports drinks are a good option too, but you know, mainly carbohydrate rich foods that are lower in fat and protein so that you can get that quick energy during that time.
Awesome. And just kind of to expand on that, like, I'm a certified athletic trainer as well. And so I was in the collegiate scene for a few years, and it was always pre-game meal a few hours before, and it was pasta or chicken parm and stuff like that. And I feel like it was really heavy. And I look back, I'm like, is that really the best option? Like, what are your thoughts on that pre-game, post-game pasta loading type meals?
Yeah, I mean, pasta is a great carbohydrate source. So, you know, you shouldn't be afraid of pasta. You shouldn't avoid pasta as long as you have adequate time. And I know, you know, at BU, for example, I know the teams have their pre-game meal 4 hours before competition. So they have plenty of time to digest that meal before they go into competition. And sometimes because they have so much time, they may need to get a quick snack in before that game because it's been already 4 hours since the last time they've eaten. You know, and depending on how long the game is going to be, they might want to have a quick carbohydrate snack before going on the field or the court or wherever they're competing. But yeah, I mean, having a pasta meal is totally fine pre-game as long as you have plenty of time to digest it. And the same thing for post-game. Again, it's a great source of carbohydrates. We need carbohydrates for post-game as well as some protein. So making sure we're adding some chicken or we're adding some type of protein to get that.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. And another question we have here, as a former athlete, I'm finding my relationship with food and fitness complicated during COVID. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts regarding the impact of increased stress levels on quote unquote holding onto excess weight.
I don't know. Robin probably has more specific information about cortisol and that sort of thing. I can just speak quickly to the mental health piece, and then Robin, you can maybe hit the other part. But anytime our mood is affected, if we're not feeling good mentally, which COVID has done this to all of us, none of us are at our best mental state right now. What's easy to happen is to fall off things like sleep and regular exercise and things like that help us to be able to feel our best. Okay, so Robin can speak more to that, but I think sleep is actually probably a key too that that this person might not be getting. I don't know because they didn't mention it, but if there's a way to use things like relaxation techniques at night, meditation, things like that, that might help decrease your stress level so you get better sleep. I think that could help. But Robin, maybe you want to talk more to the nutritional part.
Yeah, that's great, Kim. That's a great point. And something that I would also mention, you know, stress definitely has a huge impact on our overall health in general, and can affect, you know, weight and whether our abilities to lose weight or whatever it may be. You know, when we're really stressed, as Kim had mentioned, like our cortisol levels are really high, which can, which can have an impact on our weight. And there are so many things that will stress our body. If we're not getting adequate recovery, if we're not getting adequate sleep, as Kim had already mentioned, that is huge in terms of the amount of stress that our body is having. We're not giving our body the rest that it needs in order to kind of have a break from that stress. So it's like you're constantly stressed from your day to day, whether it's with work, whether it's with, life situations, maybe you lost your job, you're not able to exercise, you're not in your regular routine, and you're constantly stressed and your cortisol levels are really high, that can definitely affect your weight and your ability to lose weight, or even for some people, their ability to gain weight if that is a goal that they have. So stress can affect you in all types of ways, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another question here, Dr. O'Brien, I find that a lot of athletes are new to serious athletics, collegiate, AAU. They don't realize how many calories they're burning in competition or practice. Is this a possible gateway to an eating disorder? And can you recommend any tools that help the athletes understand how much they need to eat in order to refuel properly?
So I would say it's not a gateway to an eating disorder, but what it is a gateway to is energy deficiency. So what we can do is, like, for instance, Robin, the talk you gave was like perfect. Like if coaches could help educate their kids on their athletes on this stuff, or if it's not the coach, if you have, depending, if it's college, I would think that there'd be a lot of dietitians in colleges that should be able to talk with your players about this. Because they need to know how to refuel. Once they know, if then they're restricted and they're causing problems, even when they know that it's affecting their performance, or if they have been underfueling and you help make them aware of that, and then they're resistant to changing, that's when you clue into, okay, maybe there's something going on here. Sometimes athletes, they don't know they are, and they're like, oh my gosh, and then they start, changing the way they're eating. They're like, oh, I feel so much better. I've been, running, I'm performing better, everything's better, and then it's over, and they figure it out. But for some, it like this anonymous attendee noted, there's a complicated relationship between food and fitness that might need to be addressed a little bit further.
Yeah, I definitely think that phrase, relationship with food and relationship with nutrition, like that was something, I mean, I'm only 30 years old, but like back when I was an athlete, that was a phrase that didn't really exist, or at least I didn't know if it did. And so like now I look back on my quote unquote relationship with food and I would consider it pretty unhealthy. And so I look at my daughter now and I'm just like, how can I help give her a positive relationship with food? And, because much like that anonymous person put in their question, I can emotionally eat because of stress, or some people stop eating because of stress. And I think that it's really important to kind of evaluate your relationship with food.
Yeah, I think it can become complicated too, because I think a lot of times people feel they need to earn the food they eat. This is what we see a lot with disorder eating emerging, is they feel like, oh, well, I didn't run today, or I didn't have a workout, and so I can't eat as much. But that's not how it works. And like Robin, you can talk more about that if you want to, but I know just from like the mental health standpoint, is if you feel like you need to do something to earn the right to eat, then that's signaling that there's something going on there, some problem.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that too, because I come across that a lot with my athletes too. They're like, oh, well, it's my rest day, so I don't have to eat as much. And I'm like, well, it's one day out of 6 days that you are, are resting, you know? So like, this is your day to really maximize your recovery and still get that good nutrition in so that you can feel good and fresh for your next week of 6 days of training, you know? So just because you're taking one day off a week, it doesn't mean that that one day you need to change how you're eating, or you need to eat less, or you're not, it's not okay for you to eat carbohydrates or whatever it may be. It's even more so important on that day because that is your recovery day. And the point of that day is to recover. And in order to do that, part of that is to have good nutrition. So, yeah.
And conversely too, you have some athletes who they will eat more than they would typically. And so as a result, they have to quote unquote like punish themselves and do like a harder workout or a longer workout. And that could also be deceiving too, because it's, you think that since you've taken in all of these extra calories, that you need to work out more because of that. And I think that's a big, misnomer too.
Yeah, we call those like compensatory behaviors. So your fitness should be separate from your food in the sense of when you go for a run, you shouldn't be running so that you can compensate for what you've eaten. They should be considered like you should be that you shouldn't be engaging in compensatory exercising.
Mm-hmm. And also like sometimes what our collegiate athletes might get into, like they have a fun weekend coming up. So, they want to, work hard during the week so they can have fun on the weekend. And so that can also, be that unhealthy type relationship with it. So we got to find, just like Robin, you were saying at the end of your presentation there, we got to find a balance. Yeah. So I think that's all of our questions. And so we'll basically stop it there, but I just want to take a second. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Robin, for putting on this webinar for us. Some really good information to kind of squash some, questions out in the world right now, especially because stresses are high during this time. So I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody who attended and asked questions and participated. We really do appreciate it. And hopefully you can stay tuned for our upcoming webinars in the near future. And thank
Thanks
you
so much.
Kim and Robin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.